Why do house prices keep rising, even when fewer people can afford homes? Because for the rich, expensive housing is not a problem. It's a wealth-building machine. When property prices rise, wealthy investors become richer without doing extra work. Their assets grow, their properties gain value, and more people are forced to rent. And guess who owns many of those rental properties? The rich. In today's economy, rising house prices help protect wealth, power, and financial control. Before we begin, please subscribe, like, and share the video to support the channel. We will be diving into various aspects of this topic, including how rising house prices make the rich richer and why affordable housing threatens the wealthy. Most rich people don't keep their wealth in cash sitting inside a bank account. They store it in assets, and one of the biggest assets in the world is real estate. Think about it. Land is valuable. Houses are valuable. Entire cities are built on property ownership, so when house prices rise, wealthy people become richer automatically. Their net worth increases, their assets gain value, and banks are willing to lend them even more money. A millionaire with multiple properties can make huge amounts of wealth without working extra hours. That's why rich people love real estate. Because while most people work for money, property owners often let assets work for them. Here's something most people never think about. Rich people can become wealthier without selling anything. Imagine an investor owns 20 houses. If each house increases in value by just $100,000, that investor suddenly gained $2 million in wealth on paper. They didn't build a new company. They didn't work overtime. The market simply made their assets more valuable. This is called paper wealth. And even though the money isn't physically in their bank account yet, banks and investors still treat them as richer. That's one reason wealthy people want property prices to keep climbing year after year. When houses become too expensive, fewer people can afford to buy them. And when people can't buy homes, they rent instead. Now here's the important part. A large percentage of rental properties are owned by wealthy investors. So rising house prices can actually create more long-term renters, which means more monthly income for landlords. The harder it becomes to buy property, the more dependent people become on renting. And every month, renters pay money that builds wealth for property owners instead of themselves. This is why expensive housing can quietly benefit the wealthy far more than ordinary people. Banks make massive amounts of money from mortgages. And the more expensive houses become, the bigger the loans people need to take. A cheap house means a smaller mortgage, but an expensive house can keep someone paying interest for 20 or even 30 years. That means banks earn more money over time. So when property prices rise, mortgage sizes increase. Interest payments increase, bank profits increase. Housing is not just about homes. It's deeply connected to the financial system. And because banks benefit from expensive housing markets, rising property prices often help powerful financial institutions grow even richer. Millions of homeowners secretly want house prices to keep rising. Why? Because for many people, their house is their biggest investment. If house prices go up, they feel richer. Their home equity grows, and they believe their financial future becomes safer. But if prices crash, many homeowners lose a huge portion of their wealth. So a lot of people support policies that protect rising property values, even if it makes housing harder for younger generations to afford. This creates a system where expensive housing becomes politically protected, because once people own property, they often start benefiting from rising prices too. One of the biggest effects of rising house prices is the growing wealth gap. When property prices rise faster than salaries, homeowners get richer, while non-homeowners fall behind. A person who bought a house years ago may see their wealth grow massively. Meanwhile, someone renting may struggle just to keep up with rising living costs. Over time, this creates two groups: people who own assets and people who don't, and the difference between those groups keeps growing. That's why many young people today feel locked out of wealth building. Because in modern economies, owning assets often matters more than simply earning a paycheck. Modern economies are designed in a way that often rewards ownership more than labor. If you own real estate, stocks, businesses, land, your wealth can grow even while you sleep. But if you only rely on salary income, inflation and rising prices can slowly reduce your purchasing power. This is why wealthy people focus heavily on buying assets. Because assets can increase in value over time while generating passive income at the same time. The rich understand something most people don't. Working for money is important, but owning valuable assets is what usually creates long-term wealth. Rich people rarely sell their assets. Instead, they borrow against them. So when property prices rise, their houses become more valuable, and banks are willing to lend them larger amounts of money. They can then use those loans to buy more real estate, invest in businesses, purchase even more assets. This creates a powerful cycle. Rising house prices increase their wealth, and that increased wealth gives them access to even more opportunities. Meanwhile, ordinary people often borrow money just to survive. But the wealthy borrow money to expand their empire. When inflation rises, everyday life becomes more expensive. Food prices go up, transport goes up, rent goes up, but property owners often benefit from inflation because the value of their houses usually rises too, and landlords can often increase rent prices over time. So while inflation hurts many workers and renters, asset owners may actually gain wealth from it. This is why people who own real estate are often protected better during inflation periods. Because inflation doesn't just raise prices, it can also increase the value of assets owned by the wealthy. One reason real estate becomes so valuable is simple. Land is limited. Governments can print more money, but they cannot create more land in major cities. As populations grow and demand increases, valuable locations become even more expensive. That's why properties in cities like Lagos, London, New York City continue becoming more expensive over time. The rich understand that scarce assets tend to gain value, and land is one of the scarcest and most powerful assets on Earth. Many wealthy families stay rich because of property ownership. A house bought decades ago for a small amount may now be worth millions. That property can then be passed down to children and future generations, along with rental income, valuable land, financial security. Meanwhile, families without assets often have to restart from zero every generation. This is one reason wealth inequality keeps growing over time, because property ownership doesn't just create wealth for one person. It can create wealth for entire family bloodlines. Governments know that housing markets affect the entire economy. If property prices crash badly, banks can fail, construction jobs disappear, consumer spending drops, unemployment rises. That's why governments often step in to support housing markets during economic crises. They may lower interest rates, support mortgages, or introduce housing incentives. Not necessarily because they care about high prices, but because housing is deeply connected to economic stability. And when housing markets collapse, entire economies can suffer serious damage. For many global elites, luxury houses are not just homes. They are wealth storage tools. Rich investors buy expensive properties in cities like Dubai, London, New York City, not always to live there, but to protect and store wealth in stable assets. Some luxury apartments remain empty for years because the goal isn't living there. The goal is preserving wealth. And when wealthy global buyers compete for prime property, housing prices rise even higher. If housing suddenly became extremely affordable, many large investors could lose money. Why? Because lower house prices can reduce rental profits, property values, investor returns. Real estate investors often own huge portfolios worth millions or even billions, so major price drops can damage their wealth significantly. This is why some powerful groups support policies that limit housing supply or protect rising prices. Because expensive property markets often benefit investors far more than affordable housing benefits ordinary buyers. Here's what makes the housing system so complicated. It's not only billionaires who want rising house prices. Many middle-class families depend heavily on their homes for financial security. Their house may represent their retirement plan, their savings, their biggest asset. So when house prices rise, they feel wealthier and safer financially. That's why many ordinary homeowners also support rising property values. Because modern society has turned housing into more than shelter. For millions of people, it has become their primary investment. The biggest lesson here is not that houses are bad. The real lesson is that modern economies reward ownership. People who own real estate, stocks, businesses, land often build wealth much faster than people who only rely on salaries. That's why wealthy people fight so hard to protect rising asset prices. Because ownership creates leverage, income, and long-term financial power. The rich understand something very important. Money earned from working can make you comfortable, but ownership is what usually creates lasting wealth. And that's the hidden reason rich people need house prices to keep rising. Because in modern economies, owning assets often creates more wealth than working for money. But what do you think? Should housing be treated mainly as an investment, or should homes be made more affordable for ordinary people? Drop your thoughts and questions in the comments below. I'd really like to hear your opinion. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more videos on money, wealth, and how the system really works. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy videos that break down how money, wealth, and power really work, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next video.